Am I immediately going to pick up a machine gun? That's always the thing, right? As soon as I stop believing in God, I'll pick up a machine gun. I don't have the incentive. I mean, I'm not actually inclined to do that, so why would I do this? Bob Barr, former congressman from my current home state of Georgia, after the Columbine shooting, got on national television and said, if the Ten Commandments had been posted in every classroom at Columbine, this massacre would never have happened. And the whole country, I mean, not the whole country, millions of people nodded their heads. Same kind of thing. Yeah, well, that's right. And that sort of got that, if you remember, right after Columbine, the debate about the Ten Commandments in the classrooms was reignited. This is the level of our national conversation about ethics. This childish idea that Klebold and Harris perpetrated this crime because they didn't know it was wrong, right? Mm-hmm. That is the fundamental misunderstanding of ethics that we have, is that ethics is a matter of knowing right from wrong. The fact is, almost everyone knows right from wrong. When people perpetrate a crime and they go into the courtroom and they try to plead that they they were in a state of mind where they didn't understand the difference between right and wrong, despite the law and order or whatever, that defense is almost never successful. Because it's just rarely the case that somebody kills and then is arrested and then says, oh, I didn't know it was wrong. Somebody needs to tell me these things. They knew it was wrong, but they had an incentive that caused them to desire to do this. They had a higher goal that superseded their inclination to not do the wrong thing. That's not the same as not knowing the difference between right and wrong. So we've got to do better with the national conversation, and I think the American Ethical Union can be a big part of that. The idea that they are advancing, that Bob Barr and the minister were both advancing, is something called divine command theory. This is the idea that we know what's good because God tells us it's good. That's actually the way the only way that we can access moral understanding. This minister was basically saying, I can't think about why it would be wrong to cheat on my wife. I simply need to be told. And this was actually taken care of really neatly 2,500 years ago by Plato in the dialogue Euthyphro, in which this very question comes up of how we know what the good is. Do we know, is something that's good good because the gods say it's good? Or do the gods say it's good because it's good, right? So one way to think about that is something is pre-existingly good, it's inherently good. And then God communicates that to us. Well, then God's just a messenger, right? That's not a very powerful place for God to be. That's not a very necessary place for God to be. We could theoretically discover it ourselves. But if it's only good because God said it was good, and there's no inherent goodness, then morality is arbitrary. And he could just as easily say the opposite is good, and then that would be good, right? So theologians have wrestled with this, I guess is the word, for centuries, tried to come up with an answer. And some of my favorite are in the 13th century. William of Ockham actually said, he doubled down on divine command theory and said, yes, morality is entirely arbitrary. God could just as easily mandate murder, and then murder would be a good thing.
Just war.
Right. Well, there's a lot of this that comes out of that same theological decision making.
So this is the Ockham of Ockham's razor.
This is the guy. Yeah, this is the guy with the razor. Duns Scotus is another one. Same period of time, 13th century, and he said, okay, God is just a messenger for the big ones, like murder and all that. Murder is inherently bad, and he's the messenger for that. But he is the decider for not working on the Sabbath and kind of the relatively small one. So they parsed it in various different ways, neither of which solves the problem, because again, if he's a messenger or a decider, it's a problem for divine command theory. So we need to have a better way of thinking about these things. Both of those are starting with assumptions about how the world works, how God works, and then moving from there to prove the assumption. That's not a good way to think about anything. But that's why 700 years later, we still have people getting up with a straight face on national television and giving divine command theory and having enormous swaths of the American population nod their heads as if that's the way to move us forward morally, when we know very well it's not. So one of the greatest needs I think ethical culture can fill right now is improving that conversation around ethics, and that's what I'd like to see us doing. Yes?
Yeah, the argument seems to me to make much more sense, not in your mouth, in the sense that yes, you love your wife, and I think I love my husband, but that's a new concept in the world. I mean, when marriage was an economic situation and not for love, you couldn't draw on that as a
True.
reason for not going elsewhere.
True, but I'm not making an argument for it having always been wrong. I'm saying for me right now, I have reasons.
That's right, but
Yeah.
I'm saying it seems to me that the divine theory may have had some more power at a time when a man may well not have loved his wife.
That's entirely possible for the seventh commandment. My guess is that we could still make as powerful an argument for the fifth commandment, for murder, for the ninth commandment, which is lying. I know my commandments, I'm an atheist. So what I want to do, and what I think should be a big part of the ethical education program as well, is asking questions about ethics and really getting an opportunity to discuss it in a powerful way. And there's the basic question of what it is. Then there are also questions like, why are people so ethical? And when people hear it phrased that way, they say, what? But the fact is, most people, most of the time, behave ethically. And you would never know it from your email inbox when we hear that the whole world is falling apart. But presumably everybody knows the statistics. Violent crime, right now, violent crime in 11 categories across the board is currently at the lowest level since records have been kept. Across the board, and you would never know this, right? Child abductions are supposedly up by 444%. If you've seen that email, it's not true, right? Child abductions, which have always been incredibly rare, are now even more rare than they ever were before. And yet we are locking our children up. If you haven't read the book or the blog, Free Range Kids.
Yes.
Oh, this by Lenore Skenazy. Absolutely fantastic and funny and also sad, because when she said on her blog that she allowed her son to take the subway home, 9 years old I think it was, or something like that, take the subway home from Bloomingdale's, I think is what it was.
One stop, yeah.
Yeah.
It was one stop.
And it's something that he had wanted to do and was excited for, and he'd taken the subway many times, and she said, sure, you know what you're doing, right? And she went home separately, and all of a sudden she blogged about this, and she was on Fox News. All of a sudden she was a national figure as the worst mother in America for doing this. I mean, it's just a complete... And this is the world that we're living in when our kids are actually safer than they've ever been. Yet we use the phrase "this day and age" all the time. I'm totally getting off of that. So the question, why do people tend to be ethical, is a different sort of question from how in the world can we make people ethical, right? How can we get out of this maelstrom of immorality and get to a more ethical world? Well, the fact is we're already at a very high level of ethical behavior. How can we understand that and increase it even more and move it into other areas of life? Yes?
Interesting feature story on BBC News about expatriate whites moving back to South Africa. One couple said they had moved from London with their small kids because they wanted their kids to grow up as they had in South Africa, able to run outside barefoot on the grass, even though South Africa, by every statistic, is far more dangerous than London. In London, the kids are locked up and controlled. They wanted their kids to be able to run free and learn to think and be on their own.
Yeah, absolutely. It's seriously, this book. I wouldn't be surprised if she talks about that exact issue as well, the international issue. But I just so highly recommend this. She talks about things, for example, like when your kids leave school or come to school, it used to be called arrival and departure, right? Arrival and dismissal, that's what it was.
Right.
Arrival and dismissal. And now it's drop off and pick up. Because the car drives up and there's somebody there with a walkie-talkie and they send out the child with and in my district anyway, you have to have your name on your dashboard to match with the child and all this. It is, anyway.
Apparently.
Yeah, I can go on, but